The freighter Hallowcross clawed away from a dying moon as alarms howled and frost crystals scattered like falling stars. The narrator said, Kael Mercer led because no one else would. Kael Mercer said, we take the Axiom Seed, or we die empty. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, its waveform pulses like a heartbeat. Red Cade said, bounty pings just spiked starboard. Commander Juno Hart said, brace thrusters, or we shear the keel. The narrator said, behind them, the Directorate lit the sky with silent guns. Kael Mercer said, plot a slingshot into the dust ring. Mira Quinn said, I can feel it thinking, like it knows us. The narrator said, in Kael's gut the old failure rose, but he chained it and ran toward fire. The narrator said, silence returned like a bruise as the crew counted the beats they still owned. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, the seed is resonating with the ring dust. Kael Mercer said, we keep ahead or we get carved. Commander Juno Hart said, stabilizers need a prayer and a bolt. Red Cade said, I know a drift lane pirates use when they want to be ghosts. The narrator said, trust scraped thin as hull paint, yet the horizon promised choices none wanted. Mira Quinn said, it remembers something and wants to go there. Kael Mercer said, then we ride the remembering and hope it forgives us. The narrator said, the seed sang in frequencies only fear could translate. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, it encodes a map inside harmonic gaps. Kael Mercer said, a map to what? A grave or a door? Red Cade said, either pays, if we live to spend it. Commander Juno Hart said, shields are patchwork and pride. The narrator said, outside, the ring whispered of old wrecks and quick endings. Mira Quinn said, it wants to avoid the Directorate beacons. Kael Mercer said, plot blind between their teeth and keep us small. The narrator said, static, crawled the comms until a whisper threaded the noise. Nix Vale said, turn 2 degrees down and live. Kael Mercer said, identify or vanish. Nix Vale said, I already did both. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, vector matches, an unseen corridor. Red Cade said, only ghosts use those. The narrator said, Kael weighed pride against survival and chose breath. Kael Mercer said, course change now. The narrator said, the ship slid into a corridor no chart dared to hold. The narrator said, the corridor spat them beside a graveyard of shattered carriers. Commander Juno Hart said, this place eats heroes. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, the seed's amplitude rose as if calling kin. Red Cade said, bounty traffic dropped, we shook them. Kael Mercer said, not for long. Mira Quinn said, it is afraid of what remembers us. The narrator said, Kael saw his reflection in dead metal and the choice he feared. Kael Mercer said, we keep the secret or it keeps us. The narrator said, the Hallowcross drifted into the rust glow of the scrapyard moon called Barrow. Kael Mercer said, we trade quiet for a guide who knows the dead lanes. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, the seed reacts to something buried here. Commander Juno Hart said, dock fast, the hull is coughing. Red Cade said, bad idea, markets bloom in places like this. The narrator said, shadows bargained over parts, lives, and rumors like weather. Mira Quinn said, I hear a hum under the ground like a choir under stone. Kael Mercer said, we find the survivor named Pax Ren, and we leave before the guns wake. Nix Vale said, your window closes when the ash wind turns. The narrator said, they stepped into grit and deals. The narrator said, they found the survivor in a hangar sealed with prayer cloth and weld scars. Pax Ren said, I guide ships through grave paths, not lost souls. Kael Mercer said, we pay in fuel, food, and a favor that matters. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, the seed knows a corridor you cannot map. Pax Ren said, that secret draws hunters like blood draws knives. Red Cade said, knives are honest at least. Commander Juno Hart said, honest knives still cut. Mira Quinn said, he is afraid for us, not of us. The narrator said, The survivor listened to the hum, only survivors hear, and nodded once. The narrator said, payment demanded proof, and Barrow always required a dare. Pax Ren said, the grave path opens when the ring's shadow kisses the turbine spires. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, that timing is minutes, not mercy. Kael Mercer said, we run it and earn trust. Rhett Cade said, or we scatter as art across rock. Commander Juno Hart said, I can nurse the drives for one sprint. Mira Quinn said, the seed will guide if we listen without fear. The narrator said they launched into a canyon of engines older than maps, where echoes learned to stalk. The narrator said, the ship slid through shadow just as the kiss of ring light struck metal like a bell. Pax Ren said, now, left into the quiet where sensors lie. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, harmonics flatten, signature cloaks in noise. Rhett Cade said, neat trick for smugglers and ghosts. Nix Vale said, you are not alone in the quiet. Kael Mercer said, eyes up, trust the hum, not the fear. Commander Juno Hart said, power cycling, keep your breath steady. Mira Quinn said, the seed grows calm when we stop fighting it. The narrator said, hunter pings fell away like rain moving off a roof. The narrator said, trust bought with peril, invited a price no one liked to count. Pax Ren said, your secret will drown worlds if mishandled. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, it could also mend what we broke. Rhett Cade said, mending is a story told by sellers. Commander Juno Hart said, we are past stories and into debts. Nix Vale said, the Directorate moves carriers toward Barrow. Kael Mercer said, then we leave now and aim for the blind gulf. Mira Quinn said, the seed shows a door beyond charts. The narrator said, they chose the door and the storm that guards it. The narrator said, the Hallowcross slipped into the ember-lit ruins of Varela Prime, a star system gutted by forgotten wars. Kael Mercer said, we find the archive hidden in these bones. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, this system was erased from maps for a reason. Rhett Cade said, erased places pay best, if you survive. Commander Juno Hart said, radiation spikes. Shields will fry if we linger. Mira Quinn said, the seed is vibrating like it's waking up the dead. Pax Ren said, hunters stalk places like this, drawn by ghosts and greed. Nix Vale said, the Directorate as whispers already taste your trail. The narrator said, they descended toward a shattered world where echoes still burn. The narrator said, in the planet's hollowed city, they found a cracked spire humming with ancient code. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, the archive's encryption matches the seed's harmonics. Kael Mercer said, we copy fast and vanish before ghosts become flesh. Rhett Cade said, copying's easy, vanishing's the trick. Pax Ren said, the grave path tightens when secrets breathe. Commander Juno Hart said, something's powering up beneath us. Mira Quinn said, the seed glows brighter, like it's greeting an old friend. Nix Vale said, I warned you, the Directorate is never far behind. The narrator said, a low rumble turned the dust into trembling rivers of light. The narrator said, a sudden betrayal split the air like a lightning scar. Rhett Cade said, Director Voss offered more than you ever could. Kael Mercer said, you sold us for scraps. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, Rhett, this isn't survival, it's surrender. Commander Juno Hart said, I trusted you with my back. Pax Ren said, the grave path narrows for traitors. Mira Quinn said, the seed dims, it's hurt. Nix Vale said, the Directorate moves closer, emboldened by your fracture. The narrators said, their unity cracked under greed's weight, as dust storms howl. The narrator said, Director Voss's voice spilled through every comm channel like poison honeydight. Director Voss said, return what you stole and I might spare a few of you. Kael Mercer said, your mercy costs more than death. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, he's triangulating our position. Commander Juno Hart said, shields are failing. We can't hold long. Pax Ren said, grave paths bend when chased too hard. Mira Quinn said, "The seed flickers, afraid." Nyx Vale said, "My interference buys seconds, not salvation." Rhett Cade said, "Maybe there's still a way to undo this." The narrator said, "Lasers carved the ruins as warnings turned to war." The narrator said, "They escaped Varella's bones through a shattered worm gate, stars twisting like wet glass." Kael Mercer said, "We're alive, but trust is broken." Dr. Alara Wynn said, "The seed's harmonic map updated. Another route revealed." Rhett Cade said, "I'll earn my place back or die trying." Commander Juno Hart said, "You'll earn it with blood, not words." Pax Ren said, "The grave path still opens, if we hold together." Mira Quinn said, "The seed forgave. Maybe we can too." Nyx Vale said, "The Directorate won't forgive. They'll hunt harder." The narrator said, "The Hallowcross vanished into uncharted dark, chased by ghosts and choices." The narrator said, "In the hollow drift between dying stars, the Hallowcross hid like a wounded predator." Dr. Ilara Wynn said, "The seed's harmonics have shifted, something massive has awakened." Kael Mercer said, "We need a plan before the Directorate closes the net." Commander Juno Hart said, "Hull fractures are worsening, one more hit and we vent atmosphere." Pax Ren said, "Grave paths twist here. Safe routes become traps." Rhett Cade said, "Voss wants the seed intact or he'd have vaporized us." Mira Quinn said, "It's scared, Kael, like it knows what's coming." Nyx Vale said, "The Directorate's shadow fleet gathers just beyond sensor range." The narrator said, "A tremor of dread rippled through their fragile alliance." The narrator said, "In a quiet maintenance bay, Rhett faced the accusing eyes of the crew." Kael Mercer said, "Your betrayal nearly ended us." Rhett Cade said, "I thought a deal could buy our lives, my mistake." Dr. Ilara Wynn said, "You gambled with more than lives, you gambled with worlds." Commander Juno Hart said, "Trust is thinner than this ship's skin." Pax Ren said, "Grave paths forgive few missteps." Mira Quinn said, "The seed's light flickers when we fight." Nyx Vale said, "The Directorate plays us against each other. Choose unity or death." The narrator said, "A fragile thread of forgiveness trembled, but did not break." The narrator said, "An urgent ping revealed the Directorate's blockade closing the worm corridor." Nyx Vale said, "Voss has deployed shadow mines, your path is sealed." Dr. Ilara Wynn said, "Unless we risk the singularity drift." Kael Mercer said, "Then we risk it, better oblivion than a cage." Commander Juno Hart said, "Engines may not hold in the drift's pull." Pax Ren said, "The drift eats ships whole." Mira Quinn said, "The seed hums louder, as if calling us forward." Rhett Cade said, "Then let's make the universe chase our ghosts." The narrator said, "Stars bent like molten glass as they turned toward the impossible." The narrator said, "Within the drift's heart, the seed projected a vision of galaxies unraveling." Mira Quinn said, "It's showing what happens if Voss wields it." Dr. Ilara Wynn said, "The seed contains the coordinates of a cosmic fulcrum, a power that can reset star systems." Kael Mercer said, "Then Voss doesn't just want control, he wants to remake reality." Commander Juno Hart said, "We cannot let him near it." Pax Ren said, "Grave paths bend for destiny itself." Rhett Cade said, "I'll stand with you this time." Nyx Vale said, "The universe itself trembles at your choice." The narrator said, "Their fear crystallized into resolve beneath collapsing light." The narrator said, "The Directorate's shadow fleet descended, flanking the drift's exit like vultures." Director Voss said, "Deliver the seed and I grant you painless ends." Kael Mercer said, "You'll have to tear it from the void." Dr. Ilara Wynn said, "I've aligned the seed to overload their sensors." Commander Juno Hart said, "Engines ready. On your mark." Pax Ren said, "Grave paths reveal one last gamble." Rhett Cade said, "Let's make them regret hunting us." Mira Quinn said, "The seed is burning bright, it believes in us." Nyx Vale said, "Then burn brighter than their fear." The narrator said, the Hallowcross charged the blockade, fire meeting fire. The narrator said, the Hallowcross limped into the shadow of a fractured moon, where old war wreckage drifted like tombstones. Kael Mercer said, we regroup here or not at all. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, the Seed's harmonics stabilize, it knows this place. Commander Juno Hart said, hull integrity is barely holding, we need miracles. Pax Ren said, miracles cost blood and belief. Brett Cade said, I'll do what it takes to mend what I broke. Mira Quinn said, the Seed hums softly, like it forgives. Nix Vale said, forgiveness is a fragile thread, hold it tight. The narrator said, among wreckage and memory, they gathered broken hopes. The narrator said, in the wrecked hangar of a fallen dreadnought, the hidden ally emerged fully for the first time. Nix Vale said, I am not who you think, I was once the Directorate's architect. Kael Mercer said, you designed the chains they use on the galaxy? Dr. Ilara Wynn said, then you can break them. Red Cade said, or bind us tighter. Commander Juno Hart said, this is a risk we can't measure. Pax Ren said, grave paths sometimes require dangerous guides. Mira Quinn said, the Seed brightens around her, it trusts her. The narrator said, truth and betrayal blurred in the ruins. The narrator said, Nix revealed fragments of a plan woven through betrayal and redemption. Nix Vale said, the Directorate's blind spot lies in the rift of glass, unmapped and unstable. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, navigating that rift could tear us apart. Kael Mercer said, then we thread it or die hunted. Commander Juno Hart said, engines need patchwork miracles for that run. Pax Ren said, I can chart ghost paths through its edges. Redcade said, let me prove my loyalty. Let me scout the rift's entry. Miraquin said, the Seed pulses approval. It wants this gamble. The narrator said, they agreed, their unity forged in fragile trust. The narrator said, preparation for the rift demanded desperate repairs and quiet courage. Commander Juno Hart said, stabilizers were built with scrap. Don't ask how long they last. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, I've tuned the Seed's harmonics to mask our signature. Kael Mercer said, every gamble we take tightens the noose. Redcade said, then let's hang them with it instead. Pax Ren said, grave paths smile on bold hearts. Mira Quinn said, the Seed sings a song of hope. Nix Vale said, let its song guide your hands when fear blinds your eyes. The narrator said, in the dead quiet, their resolve hardened like steel. The narrator said, with engines patched and hearts steeled, the Hallowcross faced the rift of glass. Kael Mercer said, no turning back, this is our storm. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, the Seed's frequency aligns, the door opens. Commander Juno Hart said, engines at full burn, hold tight. Pax Ren said, follow the grave path I marked or be swallowed whole. Redcade said, for once, I trust more than luck. Mira Quinn said, the Seed's light feels warm, it believes. Nix Vale said, then burn through and claim the future. The narrator said, they plunged into light and shattered reality, chasing hope. The narrator said, the rift of glass erupted into a storm of fractured light as the Hallowcross emerged on the other side. Kael Mercer said, we're through, but the fleet will not be far behind. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, the Seed's coordinates point to the Fulcrum world. This is where reality bends. Commander Juno Hart said, engines are screaming. We may not get a second chance. Pax Ren said, grave paths have no mercy, only choices. Red Cade said, then we make ours count. Mira Quinn said, the Seed feels alive, it's guiding us. Nix Vale said, Voss is already here, his flagship shadows the horizon. The narrator said, the final hunt had begun beneath shattered stars. The narrator said, the Directorate's flagship, a leviathan of steel and hatred, loomed from the Fulcrum's shadow. Director Voss said, the universe's rebirth belongs to me. Kael Mercer said, you'll break it before you save it. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, the fulcrum amplifies the seed's power. If misused, it shatters galaxies. Commander Juno Hart said, shields holding at 60%. Pax Ren said, paths close around us. Choose well. Ret Kate said, then we dance between their fire. Mira Quinn said, the seed hums with warning. Nyx Vale said, hold steady, one misstep and all is lost. The narrator said, laser fire painted the dark with deadly light. The narrator said, within the fulcrum's orbit, the seed projected a lattice of cosmic veins connecting every star. Mira Quinn said, it's showing the lifelines of the universe. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, this is the knowledge Voss covets. Kael Mercer said, then we destroy the lattice before he corrupts it. Commander Juno Hart said, power conduits are unstable. Time is short. Pax Ren said, we can overload the fulcrum's core, but it will cost dearly. Ret Cade said, I'll buy us that cost. Nyx Vale said, make the choice, now. The narrator said, the cosmos trembled with their decision. The narrator said, the battle erupted as Directorate fighters swarmed the Hallowcross in a spiral of fire. Commander Juno Hart said, shields are gone, brace for impact. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, seed harmonics destabilizing. The fulcrum reacts violently. Kael Mercer said, hold formation, we finish this. Ret Cade said, I'll draw them off, cover me. Pax Ren said, this is your redemption, Ret. Mira Quinn said, no, don't leave us. Nyx Vale said, his path bends here, let him choose. The narrator said, Ret's fighter peeled away, blazing into the heart of the enemy swarm. The narrator said, Ret's sacrifice tore a hole through the Directorate line, giving the Hallowcross a fleeting chance. Kael Mercer said, he gave us this moment, don't waste it. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, the seed's power is peaking, it's ready. Commander Juno Hart said, brace for core overload. Pax Ren said, once triggered, the fulcrum will implode, run or be erased. Mira Quinn said, the seed whispers of hope, even in ending. Nyx Vale said, history will call this defiance or folly. The narrator said, the fulcrum flared like a newborn star as destiny ignited. The narrator said, the Hallowcross coasted among silent stars, its hull scorched but its heart unbroken. Kael Mercer said, we survived the fulcrum, but Ret's absence is a wound we'll carry. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, the seed's harmonics are quiet now, like a heartbeat at rest. Commander Juno Hart said, every victory has a price. We paid ours in blood. Pax Ren said, grave paths always demand tribute. Mira Quinn said, the seed feels lighter, as if it mourns too. Nyx Vale said, the Directorate reels, but they will return stronger. The narrator said, in the deep quiet, grief and resolve shared the same breath. The narrator said, they gathered in the mess bay, a place that once held laughter now heavy with silence. Kael Mercer said, Ret's choice gave us this chance, let's not squander it. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, the fulcrum's destruction will ripple through every system. Commander Juno Hart said, the Directorate will regroup. They always do. Pax Ren said, new paths open where old ones collapse. Mira Quinn said, the seed hums softly, it's not the end. Nyx Vale said, every ending is a beginning in disguise. The narrator said, hope flickered like a distant star on the edge of despair. The narrator said, in the observation deck, the seed projected fragments of distant galaxies rebuilding themselves. Mira Quinn said, it's showing us healing worlds. Dr. Ilara Wynn said, the fulcrum's energy seeded regeneration instead of collapse. Kael Mercer said, Ret's sacrifice didn't just save us, it saved them. Commander Juno Hart said, we've become guardians of something bigger than vengeance. Pax Ren said, grave paths sometimes lead to light. Nyx Vale said, the universe remembers defiance. The narrator said, a fragile spark of renewal glimmered against infinite dark. The narrator said, on the bridge, a quiet resolve settled like dust after a storm. Kael Mercer said, The galaxy may see us as criminals, but we've given it a future. Dr. Alara Wynn said, "The seed will need guarding. It's a beacon and a curse." Commander Juno Hart said, "We'll be hunted, but we'll be ready." Pax Ren said, "Grave paths remain for those willing to walk them." Mira Quinn said, "We can be more than outlaws, we can be hope." Nix Vale said, "The Directorate will not forget. They will come." The narrator said, "Purpose replaced fear, and stars stretched ahead like promises." The narrator said as the Hallowcross slipped into hyperspace, the seed pulsed one last warning beat. Mira Quinn said, "It whispered a new danger, far beyond Voss." Kael Mercer said, "Then we prepare for the unknown." Dr. Alara Wynn said, "We've bought the galaxy time, let's not waste it." Commander Juno Hart said, "We are scars and saviors both." Pax Ren said, "Grave paths never truly end." Nix Vale said, "The universe has only begun to test you." The narrator said, "Their ship vanished among stars, a spark of defiance in an endless night."